Hey, what's happening, Herpers? So I am back with December's long-awaited patron-chosen video, and back in December, my patrons chose for the video topic to be how I made these DIY rocks for my reptiles, or rather, how to make DIY rocks in general. And so I'm going to be showing how I do a little bit of maintenance on these rocks that I made probably around 8 or 9 years ago. You can kind of see how they hold up over time, as well as taking you through the entire process of making one of these rocks from start to finish, so you can see how to make these DIY rocks for yourself, because it really is easy, along with seeing what type of maintenance you might have to do down the road if you take this route for making your reptiles enclosure.
Hey. Alright, well I guess I'm done dusting that off and
Well, he already notices what I took. He's like, hey, that was my favorite hide. Don't worry, Bojangles, I'll have it back to you in no time. Does that sound alright to you? I see. I'll take that as a yes. Next up, I'm going to be grabbing a hide out of Jupiter's enclosure. Now, all of these hides have aged pretty well, especially for how old they are. But as you are going to see in a minute here, these hides are made out of grout, and that is what gives them their rock-like finish. But because of that, over the years, I've moved them. They've been in multiple enclosures. I've dropped them. Some of them have cracked and chipped. The paint has come off. Some of them, even the grout has come off and has exposed the styrofoam interior to these rocks. So I figured while I show you how to make reptile rocks from scratch today, I would go through and do a couple patch jobs to repair my old ones. And if you thought borrowing the hide from Bojangles the rattlesnake was nerve-wracking, Jupiter my gecko is the one I'm really nervous about not letting down. And if you're not sure why, you can check out this video in the top right corner on my most vicious pet reptile, which may or may not be Jupiter, my smallest gecko. So I've gone ahead and retrieved all of the reptile rocks that I'm going to be repairing in this video, and I'm washing them off right now. But in the meantime, I'll show you how to get started on making your reptile rocks. Cardboard is a great skeletal material for these rocks. Styrofoam is an even better material for you to base your rocks around. And if you saw my video on how I made my boa constrictor and tegu enclosures, you already saw how you can use great stuff foam as a sculpting tool in reptile enclosures. And that can also be a great option for making the shape of whatever you want your rock to be. Now this brand new rock is probably going to be for Jupiter, because I can't just come back to her with a regular rock and not expect her to eat a couple of my fingers. So I really have to go above and beyond for her, and so I'm just sketching out with a marker the shape of the rock that I'm going to make for her. I want it to be natural looking, so I'm going to just go for a nice round shape. That seems pretty natural to me. And with my outline as a guide, I can start to cut out the shape of the rock. The nice thing about using this method of making reptile decor is that if you're making things like rocks or trees or other things found in nature, your circles don't need to be perfect, and none of your lines need to be straight, and your paint job doesn't need to be perfect, because nature is not perfect and there's all sorts of uneven stuff in nature. So if you don't consider yourself much of an artist, don't worry, don't let that deter you from taking on this project, because you really don't need to make it come out perfect for it to look perfect in the end, if that makes sense. Anyway, once I cut out this rock, I realized that it wasn't looking very much like a rock, and I realized that's because I made a circle, and rocks are more spherical. So I'm going to use this balloon to get that round shape, and I'm going to do some good old-fashioned paper mache over it with some Mod Podge. Now that I've got a bunch of shredded newspaper ready, I'm doing about a 2 parts water to 1 part Mod Podge mixture, just to make the glue a little soupier and make it easier to fully coat the newspaper with. And once that newspaper is fully coated, I'm going to just start draping it over the balloon and the cardboard to start giving us that more round rock shape. And now that I have a few layers of paper mache over the balloon forming the beginning of our rock, I'm going to let that dry and work a little bit on the styrofoam side of the rock. Now, this is one of my favorite ways to make fake rocks for reptiles because you can just kind of hold on to styrofoam as you get it with things that you purchase, as it comes to you as a waste product usually, and turn it into some really cool cage decor for your reptiles. So I'm just going through now and using some liquid nails to stick all of these blocks of styrofoam together to give me just something a little bit larger to work on that I will then take a hot knife to and sculpt into the shape that we want our rock to be. And while I'm waiting for the liquid nails to dry on the styrofoam, I'm going to go ahead and do another layer of newspaper on this part. In total, I probably ended up doing around 3 or 4 layers of newspaper on the dome. And towards the end, I would just hold the balloon up to the light to see where I was still seeing light through the newspaper and just made sure to touch all those spots up so I couldn't see light through it anymore. And now that creating the form for my new reptile rock is well underway, I'm going to finally get to touching up the old reptile rock. This is just some white non-sanded grout, and it's the same material that we'll be using to make the new reptile rock, but it's also going to fill in the gaps where the original grout fell off. You can see what I mean on this rock where a big piece of it is broken off, and that's because it originally had another kind of side piece that came down from there, so it was just a small tunnel entrance to a corner hide. And that entire piece broke off. I think that happened when I was moving a few years ago. Some stuff shifted and it just broke under the pressure. But I continued to use the hide because tipped over, it just worked for Bojangles and he would happily stuff himself under it. So I'm going to cover up that styrofoam with some fresh grout and then we'll get all of these painted. Because other than a few chips in the grout and paint, these hides are looking great for being as old as they are. And after doing this repair job and resealing them, they'll be ready to be used for another 10 years. And now with all the chips in the grout and thin spots covered, I'll leave those to dry and we will flash forward to tomorrow where I'm going to repeat the entire process. But first I have to get this balloon that gave us the shape of the rock out of here. So I'm going to try to peel it off of the newspaper as carefully as I can. I'm not sure if just popping it would cause it to implode on itself in any way. We're in good shape. And now I will finish peeling out those remaining pieces of balloon so they aren't in our way when we start to cover this in the grout. When I do this, I like to use a more watery mixture for the first layer of grout, and that's because it seems like it helps me just get a good cover, and no matter how thick I make the grout, it never seems like it wants to stick very well on the first layer, so I like to go thin with the first layer, and use this first layer as a layer for all the other layers to stick to. Now while we wait for that first coat of grout to dry, let's check back in on the styrofoam that we used the liquid nails on. Now that the liquid nails is cured, I'm going to use this hot knife to start sculpting. You can pick one up for anywhere from $15 to $30 depending on all the bells and whistles and added attachments you want. This is a cheapo $15 one, and you can see that it gets the job done very easily. And I highly recommend using one of these because if you don't, your workspace is going to end up looking like a blizzard came through, because using any sort of traditional knife on styrofoam will leave you with all of those annoying little styrofoam balls that you'll be finding in the corners of your house for months. Okay, check it out. We've got the shape of our rock coming together. This hide is going to be for my gecko, and I'm thinking of making it so she can go inside of it. So for that, I'm going to make a top section and a bottom section so I can lift the top off and get to her if I need to. So right now I've sectioned the interior into quarters and I'm just using the hot knife to kind of cut it out one little slice at a time. Okay, and now that I have that interior space carved out, I just need to make a way for Jupiter, my gecko, to get in and out of the hide, so I've made these little ramps. And once I get that all glued together with liquid nails, I think this reptile hide will really be coming together. Now while I'm waiting for the liquid nails to dry on Jupiter's ramp, I'm going to go ahead and do another coat of grout on the top half. And if you're wondering how many layers of grout to do, I don't really know. I'm not an expert in this by any means, but typically doing 3 or 4 layers of grout works pretty well for me, and as a rule of thumb, I try to make sure that I cover whatever I am using as the frame for the rock so thoroughly with the grout that I can't see any of the newsprint through it anymore, or any of the pattern of the styrofoam. I want to look at it and only see grout. And then once it meets that requirement, I'm kind of just going off of vibes. And luckily, after just the second coat of grout on the rocks that I'm repairing, the vibes were right and they looked ready to paint. Now, if you're not a painter, don't worry, neither am I. I promise this process is really simple and anybody can pull it off. So whether you're just touching up a project or starting from scratch, you'll want to pick a base color for your rock. Since these rocks are all kind of grayish, I just went with a light gray. And whatever color I use for the base coat of paint, I like to make sure that I cover all of the grout so it can kind of act like another layer of sealant, even though the last step of making these rocks, once they're fully painted, will be sealing them entirely. Alright, I am back and the first layer of paint is dry, so now I'm going to go through and try to make this patch job look more natural and less like somebody was trying to cover up graffiti. So to get that more natural look, I'm going to try to introduce some randomness by using the paint bristles to kind of flick some paint onto these rocks. I got a little more paint, that's working a little better. You know, I don't think these bristles are stiff enough to really get that paint flicking effect, but if you have an old toothbrush, those bristles will work well for this. But today I tried using the tips of the bristles to kind of just dab on some paint as randomly as I could. Again, I'm not really a painter, but you can see how that black paint is starting to add some more depth to the rock, and then I'm going to come in and add what I want to look like a shadow between these rocks to make this look a little less like it's one piece. Next, I'm going to try to bring the rocks to life by adding a little bit of moss to it. I'm just dabbing the moss on with a paper towel, and the big trick to this part is just experimenting with how much paint you want on the paper towel to dab an amount of moss onto the rocks that looks right. So there are all of the rocks after adding some black and some green to kind of simulate some shadows and ridges and bumps and moss on the rocks. And I'm not quite happy with how they're looking yet, so I decided to try adding a little bit more randomness to the rocks by flicking paint on them again. Since the bristles weren't stiff enough on the brush I was using, I decided just to water down the paint, which I think worked well because it also ended up giving me a slightly different hue of the color of paints that I used. I did this with the black and the gray, and I think it ended up adding another good layer of dimension to the rocks. And at this time, after they were done drying, I was happy with how they all looked, which means now it is time to seal these rocks. For this, I'm using Mod Podge, the same stuff we used to paper mache the new rock in today's video. The great thing about Mod Podge is it dries clear, so even though it looks like it's changing the color right now, it will be clear and won't really change the appearance of the final product. That is, as long as you don't get the glossy finish one. There is a glossy finish one that'll give you a nice shiny coat if that is what you were looking for, but I'm using the matte finish today. The one drawback to using Mod Podge is it is not waterproof. It will start to come off if you soak it, or if you have to regularly wet the enclosure and wipe things down, you can start to rub through it, but you really have to work on it for a while, and unless you are soaking the rocks to remove excrement from them or something like that, it's just never really been something that caused problems for me. And lastly, while that Mod Podge is drying, I'm going to sprinkle just a little bit of sand to add some texture to the rocks so they're not completely smooth, and this will also add just that final touch in making them look a little bit more natural. Then once this coat of Mod Podge has dried, I'll cover it up 2 more times just to make sure that I have fully sealed these rocks to give them the best chance as possible that they last a long time. So besides those final layers of Mod Podge, these rocks are done. And now we'll just work on finishing up Jupiter's new hide. So here's the bottom of the hide. It looks like the liquid nails is doing its job, and I've already added a little bit of grout to the interior of it, but I'm going to go ahead and just cover the whole thing in grout now to turn it into a rock. And while that dries, luckily the top half has been completely petrified, so now I can get to work painting that. I'm trying something a little different with this one and using some silver paint. It might seem a little weird, but if you've ever been out hiking and you've looked down, sometimes you'll notice it looks like the ground is peppered in glitter while you're out for a hike in the desert. And what all those thin reflective flecks are is mica. So even though silver might seem like a weird color for a rock, I'm thinking it's still going to look pretty natural. And now I'll add some moss to this rock just like the last ones, but this time I'm using a brush because I'm covering such a wide area. And the exterior is looking pretty good, but now I've got to paint the interior too, so I'll carefully flip this over and add a little silver to the underside of the rim. Now that the top half of Jupiter's hide is fully painted, I'll set that aside to dry and do another layer of grout on the bottom half. And then it's back to the top half of the hide to finish painting the interior now that the rim is dry enough for me to hold on to. Then once it was fully blacked out, I added some stars for Jupiter to look up at while she sleeps. And now Jupiter's new rock hide is really coming along. It's looking nice and natural. I know if I was a government agency, I would say this looks completely natural and there's nothing to see here, just your average, everyday, ordinary rock. But something does look a little off. It's the bottom half. The bottom half needs more grout. Looks a little soft still. But unfortunately that means that I was not able to finish Jupiter's hide in time for this video. I was still waiting for that grout on the bottom half to dry, so I wasn't able to paint it in time for this video. But don't worry, I will be showing you how the finished product came out in next week's video, where I will be presenting Jupiter with our brand new finished hide. So make sure to drop a like if you've enjoyed this video and subscribe so you don't miss Jupiter getting her finished hide next week. But now it's time to give all my reptiles their repaired rock hides back. And check it out, they are all done. So this is how they came out. I'm pretty happy with them. Again, most of the work was already done on these. I was just touching up the few spaces on them that started to show signs of wear over the years. I can tell that's one of the places I touched up, and it looks a little different than I remember it looking, but we're gonna get that one. Whose is this? This one was actually in Jupiter's enclosure. I might end up having an extra one after this because she's going to be getting the special hide. But in the meantime, because it's not done yet, I guess I can put that back in here with Jupiter. You don't know what's coming, but it's going to be cool. And I'm going to just put that right there for her to find her way into on her own time. You want a worm while I'm here? Oh, there, in the refrigerator. I will be right back. Don't bite me. I'm coming back with food. I promise. Alright, sorry for the inconvenience. Got a worm for you. There you go. Alright, I guess that means we've got to get Bojangles his hide back next, and I guess he's been missing it because he is sitting right in the place where it's going to go, so I think we're going to find out if he wants to come out or sit patiently on the other side of his enclosure for me. What's it going to be today? Alright, Bojangles, how do you feel about hanging out on the other side of your enclosure for me? Just give you a little nudge. No, it's okay. You don't gotta come out. He's like, why are you touching me? Stop it. Alright, here's what we're gonna do. I'm just gonna scoop ya. And yeah, you got the idea. There you go. Alright, so there's his hide, but I'm not gonna just put it in there because even though he is on the other side of the enclosure, Bojangles is starting to get big and he might be able to reach across this faster than I could get my hand out. So I'm gonna use the tongs to put the hide in place. And here we go. Let's see if I can get this situated without having to pull Bojangles out. He is watching me, but looks like he is content to leave me alone if I leave him alone. Alright, so there we are, his new rock in place. He is still just sitting on the other side of the enclosure. Quite annoyed that I've disrupted him, but hopefully after I leave the room and come back, he'll have some time to check out his new hide and we can see if he likes it or not. And now I'll give Lucy, my wife's Honduran milk snake, back her hide. Hers was kind of the funniest repair because I'm pretty sure she chipped that corner of the hole. Striking out at food, she just hit it hard enough that she was the thing that chipped it. But when she's not under her tortoise shell, she's usually under this hide, so I'm excited to have it fixed for her. As you can see, Jupiter already took a liking to her new hide. I had to use the worm to coax her out. But then I think she took a little bit more interest in me being there because she stepped on the worm and then proceeded to ignore it entirely. But that's alright, I helped her find it eventually. Oh, hey, you almost... I was gonna say you almost didn't get my finger. You got the worm. You got the worm, but you got my finger too. Alright, there you go. Victorious. Well, do you like the hide at least? Well, don't worry, because this isn't your permanent hide. Your new hide should be done by next week. Do I get to keep my fingers till then? Alright, cool. And that's gonna about do it for today's video. Luckily, even Bojangles went over and checked out his repaired hide before I was completely done filming, and it looked like he was more or less content with my handiwork. But I would love to hear your thoughts on how I did. Hopefully some of you out there found this video helpful and will be able to use it, or at least some of the techniques that I showed in this video, to create your own reptile decor. If you did learn something from this video or got something out of watching it, please remember to drop a like so I know to make more videos like this in the future. And don't forget to subscribe so you can see how Jupiter's finished, completely natural, nothing to see here rock comes out in next week's video. And as always, I would like to thank my patrons that voted for today's video topic, starting with my head herpers: Allie Ward, Amanda Lynn, Deborah Torgerson, Jane Cabingirl, JCH, Lindsay Justice, Loki and Thor, Sierra Sicard, and Tiffany H. Thank you again to all of my head herpers for supporting this channel at the highest tier level every month, and thank you to all of my other patrons who support this channel at the other tier levels. But with that, I hope you enjoyed this week's video. I hope none of your reptile rock hides go flying away unexpectedly, but most of all, I hope that you just keep herping.